Today we're going to be talking about figurative language and how you identify that figurative language in poetry. This is really important because we're going to use the different elements we talk about this week in these videos to help you at the end of the week write up like a paragraph response. So figurative language is one of the major devices that help poetry be so appealing and unappealing to others, because figurative language is a way to present ordinary things in a fresh way, communicating ideas that go beyond the word's ordinary meaning. So when we're talking about figurative language, it's not your typical. It's not, words don't necessarily mean what they would normally mean in everyday talking. So that's why it can sometimes be frustrating for people who do read poetry and are trying to figure out what it means. It doesn't make sense to them, because with the figurative language, you might have to go a little deeper in order to figure out what the author or poet is trying to say. However, it is also one of the things that makes poetry so beautiful. So the first example of figurative language is a simile. A simile is a comparison of two unlike things using the word like or as. So that's why up here at the top it says it's like a simile. We use like oftentimes in our similes. So for example, life is like a box of chocolates. Comparing life to a box of chocolates, they are not the same thing. So that's where you get the two unlike things, but we can kind of draw some similarities. When you open a box of chocolates, you're not sure what you're going to get. It is a mystery. And so is life. Everything that happens is kind of a mystery. We don't know what's going to happen next. The girl is as beautiful as a rose. Comparing the girl to a rose, the girl is not a flower, but she is beautiful like a flower. The willow is like an etching. So if you think about the willow leaves and how small they are and how intricate an etching is, you can kind of draw a comparison between those two objects, even though a willow is a tree and an etching is a picture or a painting. Our second example of figurative language is metaphor. And up here again it says it is a metaphor, because the idea of metaphor is you are comparing two unlike things, just like similes, but this time you don't use the words like or as. So examples might be, my father is a tall, sturdy oak. I'm comparing my father to an oak tree by saying he is an oak tree. Obviously, my father is not an oak tree, but he might hold some of the same characteristics of that oak tree. He might be steady and strong and reliable, just like that tall oak would be. The hotel is a diamond in the sky. Comparing the hotel to a diamond. That hotel in no way is made of diamonds, but it probably sparkles like diamonds, especially with the sun glittering off of the windows and things like that. So again, you notice here we've got is, and we've got the moon is a balloon in this third one. So by comparing one thing to another thing that are in no way related other than the fact that maybe it might share some characteristics, we are using a metaphor. The third example of figurative language is personification. Personification is giving human qualities to an animal object or an idea. So human qualities to a non-human thing or unliving thing or an animal. Examples might be hunger sat shivering on the road, the flowers danced on the lawn, and the sun peeked over the mountains. So those green words there, sat shivering, danced, and peeked, those are all things that humans can do. But hunger, flowers, and sun are not human. They are ideas, or they are non-living objects, or they're living objects that aren't human. So if you give a human quality to a non-living or non-human thing, then you're utilizing personification, which is a form of figurative language. Fourth idea for figurative language here is hyperbole. Hyperbole is an exaggeration that you're using to make a point in what you're writing or saying. So this book weighs a ton. It's obviously very heavy, but it doesn't really weigh 2,500 pounds. I could sleep for a year. Sure, I'm tired, but if I went to sleep, maybe I could sleep for 10 hours or 12 hours. I could not actually sleep for 365 days. It's just trying to make a point about how exhausted you are. So hyperbole is often used in poetry. Our fifth idea for figurative language is imagery. And oftentimes, even if you can't find any other form of figurative language, and usually you can, but if you can't find anything else, then you can find imagery. Because the whole idea about poetry is to kind of paint this picture for you in order to evoke emotion. So imagery is the figure of speech that uses vivid descriptions to produce mental images. So what we're able to get from just some words on a page helps us paint a picture in your mind. So examples might be, her clammy back felt like the bark of a tree after a summer rain. We can kind of imagine that wet feeling because we've all touched bark after it's been soaked, whether from a sprinkler or rain. And so we can kind of figure what her back must have felt like. The small pond behind my house was lapping at its banks, and that just means like the water was kind of lapping at the sides or going to the sides and probably making some kind of sound that we can kind of envision so that we know what the water sounded like. Sitting in the shade of the tree, I felt both the cool air and warm breeze of the day envelop me. We can imagine sitting under the shade of a giant tree, the coolness from being in the shade, but there's still a warm breeze going through the afternoon air, and that kind of surrounds me. So I can kind of then paint that picture of someone sitting under a tree and what they must be feeling. So what you guys are going to be doing for this assignment is you're going to be choosing a poem, and I'm going to use this poem as an example throughout the week. So I'll always be referring to this poem throughout the week. So you can't use this poem, but you can use any other poem that you want to. It can be a written poem. So if there's a poem you already know that you like, then that's fine. It can be one of the poems we've done over the last couple of weeks of poetry assignments. So it can be from any of the poetry assignments we've done, or it can be one that is a spoken word. So you've got a lot of choices here. One from any of the assignments we've done, except for this one, because I'm using it as my example all week long. You can do a poem of your own choosing if you have a poem that you really feel connected to, or you can do a spoken word poem if you choose that. Then I'll explain the assignment a little bit later, but it's totally fine to analyze that. So we'll look at this poem by Langston Hughes called Mother to Son. And the speaker says, "Well, son, I'll tell you. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time I spent a climbin' on and reachin' landin's and turnin' corners and sometimes goin' in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you set down on the steps 'cause you find it's kinder hard. Don't you fall now, for I's still goin', honey. I's still climbin', and life for me ain't been no crystal stair." So we get the idea here that the speaker is talking to her son, and that's enforced by the title, Mother to Son. So the speaker is a mom, and she's trying to talk to her son, and she's trying to convince him that he just needs to keep on going. And that's the message of the poem, all right? And that's going to be important as we get later in the week. But what we're focusing on today is the figurative language in here. And this entire poem is an extended metaphor. And metaphor is one of our figurative language. So what I did is I put in green all the words that are some kind of metaphor. So life and crystal stair, that is the comparison that she is making. She's comparing life to a crystal staircase. And a crystal staircase would be clear and crisp and clean and beautiful. And she's saying life has not been that for her. So she is comparing life to the crystal staircase, even though she's saying it has not been a crystal staircase, and she is saying that life is or is not this. And so because she doesn't use the word like or as, that is a metaphor. Now I have the green in this section, and then I also have it in a box, and I'll explain why in a minute. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor bare. So I made green the tacks and splinters and boards torn up and carpet because those are metaphors for the problems or the not problems. So no carpet would be problems. Carpet would be like a cushion, something to fall on. Boards torn up, splinters, tacks, those would all be things that hurt us, right? If we were walking on this floor. And so she's comparing again her life to a situation that has had tacks and splinters and torn up boards and no carpet. So a life that's been filled with problems. I also put the big blue square around it because this is a great use of imagery. We can imagine this torn up, beat up, awful floor that you can't walk on without stubbing your toe or getting a splinter or some kind of thing that's going to hurt us. In the next section, again, we've got a lot of the green there. That's still going to be those metaphors. And then also I put it in the blue box again because there's still more imagery here. All's the time I've been a climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So climbing and landing in corners and going in the dark where there ain't been no light, that's all a metaphor for the different stages or levels that she's gotten to in life. She's still reaching landings. She's still turning corners. So these are still things that she's been able to accomplish even though life's been so hard. She says, I've been climbing on. So she's comparing that. She's using that metaphor to say that climbing is like, I just am moving forward. I keep on going. I keep on living my life. Going in the dark where there ain't been no light, that's going to be a metaphor for the problems that exist. The unforeseen circumstances that she might have every time she gets to a decision she has to make and she's not sure what to choose, and it's like the path going down is dark and she has to make a decision. That's what that can represent. And again, it's in the blue box because that is good imagery. We can imagine going down that dark path and not having any light to lead us on our way. We can imagine getting to these corners, getting to these landings in the staircase. We can imagine someone climbing and keeping on going. So that's really good use of imagery. And then the poem ends, so boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps. She's using that as a metaphor, sit down on the steps, as a metaphor for giving up. Okay, she's trying to convince him not to give up. And because she's used the extended metaphor of the staircase all the way through, she uses this as the sitting down on the steps. So what you're going to do, your task for today, is to find a poem, written or spoken, that you want to look at a little more in depth. Then you're going to discuss how the elements on the right of the screen enhance the reading experience of the poem. So actually, all you're going to be doing today is identifying the figurative language in that poem, and then later in the week, we're going to talk about how that enhances the poem, makes it better, draws the reader in a little more. So what you'll do when you get to your assignment is you'll tell me the name of the poem, the author of the poem. You're going to copy and paste the poem into your assignment, and then you're going to be highlighting in that copied and pasted version the examples of simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, or imagery that you find. So, just like I kind of did here, you'll do that on your own. In the assignment, I highlighted the specific types of figurative language in different colors. And so I think simile might have been like yellow, metaphor was purple, I think. So you'll highlight those as you see them in your poem, the corresponding color. If you have questions, please make sure you come see me. If you're not sure what poem to use, come see me and I'll give you some options or ideas. And good luck on this assignment. Thanks, guys.